Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Zoomcast series of the Civil Society and Migration Research Line of the Nova Refugee Legal Clinic. I'm here with Sophie, Carolina, and Gabriel, who are part of the research team and also students at Nova School of Law. And today, our guest is Amanda Muñoz de Toro, co-founder and executive director of Fenix Aid, an NGO specialized in providing holistic legal aid to people seeking asylum in Greece. Amanda, thank you very much for accepting our invitation today. We're delighted to have you here. So first of all, can you tell us a bit about your professional and academic journey and how it led you to the decision to co-found Fenix Aid? We're also curious to know more about the kind of work that you carry out as executive director.
Thank you, Veronica, for the introduction, and Sophie, Carolina, and Gabriel for being here. About my background. So I am a licensed lawyer from Argentina. I practiced criminal law in the private sector in a law firm in Buenos Aires for many years before I decided that I wanted to see if I could have an international experience. So I applied for a master's in international law and justice in the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute in Italy. And while I was there, I remember I met a person from Iraq that told me that he had literally walked all the way from Iraq through Turkey and then up to Vienna where he had applied for asylum. And I have never heard of this because I come from the other side of the world where we have many other issues that are very far away from the refugee crisis that was going on in Europe. And I remember that this story resonated in my mind. So when I finished my master's, I decided to come to Greece, to Athens, and I began to volunteer for 2 months in different squats and different refugee camps, giving English classes, distributing food, cooking, creating activities for children. And when I finished this experience, I said, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm sure there's something else that I can do with my skills that is not necessarily English classes or cooking or something that requires other skills that are not necessarily mine. So I started volunteering remotely while I was working in Italy, then in Spain. I volunteered remotely for an organization, and I was doing research. I was preparing country of origin reports, so human rights reports on the conditions in different countries where people are coming from. And I was helping recruit volunteers that would then go to the field, preparing them for the experience, organizing the weekly team meetings on Skype. And after that, I was able to come to Lesbos and to Athens to volunteer as a asylum lawyer with this organization. And I was providing information sessions and preparing people for their interviews, for their asylum interviews. After this, I stopped doing this for a while because I started another master's in public policy, because I continued to see that, yes, my support at the individual level was very important, of course, but there had to be something bigger that we would be able to do that did not necessarily mean, the one-on-one or the one successful decision, but something that would impact people's lives at a more institutional level. So I did my master's in public policy in the School of Government in Oxford. And while I was there, I created a program with 2 human rights groups in Oxford that took students from the law school in Oxford to the islands in Lesbos. We prepared them, we trained them on asylum law, and then we went for 2 weeks to different locations, and they were able to have the experience to prepare people for their interviews and to distribute information. So during Oxford, I was doing this, and as soon as I finished Oxford, I went for my summer to Bangladesh to work in the Bangladesh-Myanmar border with the Rohingya refugees on a consultancy project on the legal status of Rohingya and access to education. And when I finished this consultancy, I came back to Lesbos. So this time I had more time, so I came back to Lesbos with the idea of staying 3 months. And I was working for an NGO that had many different issues. And finally, this NGO disappeared, let's say, and we were here with a group of lawyers, and they were like, well, Amanda, why you've been here many times and you know the procedure and, what are the needs? Why don't we do something? And I said, I don't want to be one more of those volunteers that just creates a project and then 6 months later leaves and just puts it on their CV just to say that they did something. I don't want to be that type of person. So I thought about it with Annie, who is the other co-founder of Fenix, and we were here together. We thought about it a lot, and we continued to see that we were providing legal services, that there were many organizations providing legal services, but that we were not happy with the traditional approach to legal aid. We saw that there was a need to provide something more comprehensive, something more holistic, because our clients were coming to the office, but they had never seen a doctor before, and perhaps they were a victim of torture. They had been raped on the journey, and then they had never seen a gynecologist, or they needed mental health support, and they could not focus on the information that we were providing because they had more basic needs that needed to be fulfilled before they could focus on their asylum process. Or we have parents that would just bring their kids in their arms because they had no access to a wheelchair and their 10-year-old had a disability. So we started seeing all these gaps in people's basic needs, which we think is a prerequisite to provide legal aid. So access to a lawyer, or let's say real access to legal information and legal support requires that some conditions are met before you have access to that lawyer. Otherwise, the access to legal aid will just be not efficient. People will not be concentrated in what you're saying. They won't be focused on their asylum procedure, but rather in fulfilling our basic necessities that people have. And if you think about it, we would all be the same way. You need to feel good with yourself. You need to be dressed. You need to have slept the night before to be able to do anything that you do in life in an efficient way. So yeah, that's what brought us to creating Fenix. We thought there is a better way, or let's say a more dignified way, or there should be a more dignified way of providing legal aid. It cannot be just lawyers giving information as if we were in a law firm in London. This is not London. There has to be something that is more humane, more comprehensive, more holistic, and that really, really takes people's needs and skills and tries to provide people with the agency so they can pay attention to that information, and then they can make decisions on the basis of that information. It's not enough just to spread information if you're not having the impact which you want to have, which is that people understand and they're able to defend themselves in what is the most important interview of their lives. So that's a little bit the summary of what brought us here.
Wow, this is really fascinating, and I think it's also very important to see the difference between the traditional approach to legal aid and how you really seek to go beyond this. I think this is really fascinating, and this is what also brought us to you. We were very curious also about this approach. And I think Sophie now has a question for you.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. It's really interesting to see the journey you've been on, and I know a lot of us in the legal clinic, we share the same passions, and it's inspiring to see the type of organisation you've created. So as we know, Fenix Aid is very active in Greece, which became notoriously infamous for its violations of human rights in relation to migrants in the last decade or so. And we've had the so-called migration crisis, the COVID-19 policies, the Moira fires. Could you talk to us a bit about the current situation of asylum seekers in Greece at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Sophie. So, yeah, the last few years have been, I think, extremely difficult for the whole world, but especially difficult for people that were living the pandemic and then the Moira fire in horrible conditions in the camps. The camp conditions are now different. I would say that they are a little bit more dignified. People have containers, there's better access to showers. But for us as a legal organization, as a protection organization, what we have been arguing for years, I mean, since we've been here, is that the living conditions are not the focus of the problem. We don't have a living condition crisis. because it doesn't matter if people were put in 5-star hotels. The issue that we have is a human rights crisis. It's a crisis of access to asylum, of the rule of law. And this is what we have tried to argue for the past years. But there was so much focus on the living conditions because the living conditions were so dire, and then the fire came, and then the pandemic came, and people didn't have access to wash facilities. They didn't have access to isolate themselves, and they were living in crowded tents, that the legal issues were kind of like sidelined because they were the same as us. We wanted a holistic approach because there were things that had to be addressed before, some basic needs that had to be addressed before. But now that some of those basic needs have in some way been addressed, all these human rights violations are coming to the light. And these human rights violations are more obvious than ever, because now you can see that even if people are less people in the camp, they have better living conditions, the violations are still there. The structural issues, the lack of access to a fair asylum procedure is more obvious than ever. People are in the camp, yes, they have a container, but many of them have been in limbo for years. They don't have access to the asylum procedure. They cannot present their claims. They cannot access the job market. They don't have access to medical services. They don't have cash assistance. Why? Because there's no access to the asylum procedure for a big group of people. And this is because there's some regulations that are not allowing people to have fair access to asylum procedure. So one of these regulations, for example, is the concept of Turkey as a safe country. And therefore, people arriving to Greece from specific nationalities are considered safe in Turkey, and therefore they're not allowed to present their asylum claim unless they can prove that Turkey is unsafe for them, which is a very difficult standard to surpass. So these people cannot prove that Turkey is not safe for them, so they're not allowed to present their claim of asylum, of why they left their home country. So they are rejected. They are told, you need to go to Turkey to present your asylum claim, but then they cannot go back to Turkey because Turkey has not been accepting people back since March 2020, so now for 2 years. So there's this big group of hundreds and hundreds of people across Greece that are stuck in this limbo situation in which they cannot move forward and they cannot move backwards. So yes, they might have a container in the camp. There might not be a Moria fire, even though there's fires every other week, which it's a miracle that no one has died yet. But even though the situation is not as dramatic as the olive groves and the jungle, as they called it in Moria, living in limbo for years in which you cannot have access to education or the job market, and you have uncertainty of what's going to happen yet, creates a mental health crisis, and it's ruining a whole generation of people that have paused their lives for 2 years. So the answer, I think, to your question would be like, living conditions are better, but what this has done is really, really highlight that we are facing a rule of law crisis in Europe regarding the access to asylum.
It's an incredibly tough climate that you're working in. Can imagine it's very frustrating at times coming up against these policies that just don't make any sense. I'll hand over to Veronica for the next question. Thanks.
Thank you. You're muted.
Still happens after 2 years of of Zoom practice. So as I was listening to you, I couldn't help but think about also the current events, because you put with the Russo-Ukrainian war, and you put a lot of emphasis in the way in which you talked about the situation in Greece on access to asylum, right? So it's access to protection ultimately that is really, really crucial. And as of yesterday, the European institutions, they decided to activate the 2001 Temporary Protection Directive, which is an instrument that has never been used before, but does allow granting an immediate protection to people in certain cases, so-called cases of mass influx, right? So this would allow giving a temporary protection to Ukrainians, right? Why do you think that this instrument hasn't been used before, for example, for dealing with the 2015 so-called crisis? And do you think that the situation in Greece would have been any different today had this directive been activated back in 2015?
That is, I mean, it's a difficult question, but it has an easy answer. I think the crisis, the war in Ukraine, and the reaction of I think of the world, and mainly of European institutions and European citizens also, has shown that we don't have a crisis of numbers. We don't have a crisis of impossibility to respond to the refugee influx. We have a crisis of political will. There was no political will to receive people that come from Afghanistan or come from Syria or Yemen, and these conflicts, these wars are not seen in the same light that the Ukraine and Russian war is seen. And I think we've all seen in social media and in the press the responses of different government officials and people from the press on how this war is worse because it's blue-eyed people or because it's people from the civilized world that look like us. I think there's this narrative that people from countries in the Middle East or in Africa, they're used to war, so it's not as bad for them. They're used to living in camps. They live in bad conditions. So if we put them in camps, it's not as bad for them. They can deal with it. I think this is a very, very damaging narrative. And I think we've all believed that it's not necessarily true, or we wanted to believe that it's not true. And then that just Greece, for example, or Europe doesn't want to receive so many people from outside. But at the end of the day, now that we see what has happened with Ukraine, we see that there is a possibility of preparing mechanisms, receiving people, building camps, building structures to receive people. And when countries want, they can do it. So I think it's very frustrating as a human rights lawyer, as a migration lawyer, to see how quickly the temporary protection was launched when you have people waiting in the camps from countries that are currently at war, that are very unsafe to go back to, like Afghanistan, like Somalia, and these people are rejected on the basis of having to go back to Turkey, which they cannot go back to, and they're stuck in camps for years. And I do think the different way in which we treat people and the way in which we receive people to European soil will have a really big impact on how these people integrate into society. And refugees in the camps from Somalia, from Afghanistan, from Yemen, from Iraq, they're not going anywhere, because as long as there's conflict, they will continue to come. So the way that we receive people into this continent will have a very long-lasting impact, I think, in the way people see the country and how they were welcomed into this country. And that's just a very sad thing.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, that makes me think also about a piece that I read yesterday, basically saying that even the Ukrainians that are being received, I mean, they're not just Ukrainians, right? They're also foreign residents in Ukraine. And that, for instance, if it's someone from Afghanistan or from another African country that resides in Ukraine, apparently it's much more difficult to cross European borders, even in the current situation, which I think gives us an additional element for also thinking about how Europe deals with migration more generally. I'll hand over to Sophie now.
Thanks, Amanda. It's really interesting what you just mentioned. I think it's given us as a team more to think about and research in the current situation. Just moving on to the next question, the 2020 new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which is currently still under discussion, has received mixed reaction from academics and activists. What is Fenix Aid's position on this, and what effects do you think that the Pact in its current version would have on the situation in Greece?
So the Pact is a very, very, very complicated set of documents. So I'm not going to go deep inside into the different instruments that are part of the Pact. I think as a general stance, what we believe is that much of the Pact is putting into regulation what we already see in practice in Greece. So it's not a new regulation. It's not something that is strange to us. It's mainly, legalizing, let's say, the illegal practices that we have seen in Greece, which have not worked. So although there is a big need to have a change in the current framework, because the current framework is already not working to deal with the migration crisis, with this pact, we are establishing the Greek practice. So fast-track border procedures, shorter deadlines, what else am I thinking? The security screenings, medical vulnerability screenings at the borders, which we have seen here that they don't work, and they have a lot of problems in the way that they're carried out. Fast-track procedures that don't allow for the guarantees that should be given to people, especially vulnerable people that are seeking asylum. So the problem with these regulations, even though they are putting into law a practice that we have already seen, the problem is that once this becomes law, we will have less legal arguments and less institutions to complain to. So right now, for example, with the fast-track border procedures or with periods of detention, we can go to European Commission and make reports on how this is not respecting procedural guarantees for asylum seekers. But once this becomes European law, it will be much harder to tell a European institution that their regulation, that Greece is not respecting procedural guarantees, because actually they will be implementing European regulations. So, I mean, it's been a very long process of discussing the pact. I think the French presidency now wants to reach an agreement before they finish their presidency in June 2022, because then the Czechs will take over, and they believe that there will probably be some backwards steps on the pact. So we understand that the idea of the presidency is to try to at least reach an agreement on the screening and the Dublin regulations, which brings a balance between external borders, protection, solidarity, and responsibility sharing. But there's many criticisms to this pact, especially with what regards to national authorities having to protect the borders, which is an euphemism for pushbacks. The fast screenings at the border, which will not allow specific groups of people to reach the asylum procedure, especially those that come from lower recognition countries. And people that come from lower recognition countries are generally people have suffered a lot of violence, especially victims of torture. That's our experience. And then for Dublin regulations, so for family reunification, they are shortening the deadlines, which should be a good thing, because it would mean that family members would be able to reunite faster. But in practice, we have seen that countries are not able or do not want to meet these deadlines, and they use these deadlines as an excuse to not comply with their share of the responsibility. So we are quite fearful that shorter deadlines in practice will mean less family reunifications. That's a bit of a summary. I mean, there's still a long way to go, I think, to have this pact approved, especially if before June it doesn't happen. I think new conversations will start again.
There's definitely a long way to go. I'll hand over to Veronica for the last two questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sophie. You said something about, Fenix age mobilizing to, for instance, also sometimes to create documents that would have impact maybe on the European Commission's work, right? But you also do some legal representation of migrants before courts, right? And I think it's mainly Greek courts. I'm not sure if you also do legal representation before the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, or if you also work with mobilizing European Union law. I'm not sure about this, but my question was more in relation to legal mobilization and legal representation of migrants before courts, be it domestic or supranational courts. I was just wondering if your experience with asylum seekers representation has been overall positive or disappointing, and what were the main victories and defeats in Fenix's strategies of legal mobilization?
Thank you for that question. So to clarify a little bit, Fenix, as part of Fenix holistic legal aid approach, we have protection services, mental health services, and legal services. The legal team works on legal representation and information at every stage of the procedure, the asylum procedure, but also the court procedure. And we represent clients in national, European, and international courts. So all the way to the end and whatever might be needed for the client. And this includes advocacy also. So it's not only legal representation in courts, but it might mean a report to a UN special rapporteur, or communications with the European Commission, with members of European Parliament on a specific topic or a specific case that has suffered specific violations. So regarding victories or defeats, so in the national level, we have implemented different strategies, and it's a big topic, so it's very difficult to answer to your question in one go. I would say that one of the biggest successes has been with unrecognized and accompanied minors. So since 2019, we have been working with children that have arrived to the Greek islands, so to Lesbos, and have been registered by the authorities as adults, even though they claim to be minors, or even though they might have documents from their home countries that say they're minors. Being registered, give me one second. Being registered as adults means that they share tents with adults, that they don't go to school, that they don't have the rights that they are entitled to as children. So this has been one of our main topics for the last years. And we have been making different presentations to different agencies to try to fight this issue. So for example, we have worked with camp management that is responsible for age assessments to try to explain to them what are the legal regulations that they should be following when they do age assessments. We have appealed these age assessments, and we have had successful results to these appeals, in which a new age assessment has been issued. And following that age assessment, the child was finally recognized as a child after 2 years of being treated as an adult in the camp. So being recognized as a child meant that they were moved to a safe shelter, that they went through the asylum interview as a child, that they have access to education, that they now have a social worker, that they are eligible for relocation to other EU countries, that they are eligible for family reunification with family members that they might have in other European countries. At the same time, we have made presentations to the Greek Ombudsman for Children, specifically about the presumption of minority. The public prosecutor here in Lesbos understands that people that are registered as adults on arrival should be treated as adults. So they reverse the presumption of minority. They don't believe that children should be children until proven otherwise. They believe people should be adults until proven children, which is a violation on all European law on the rights of children. So we have been working with the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has asked the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Children to issue a decision, which has been supportive of Fenix stance. And now we are waiting for a final decision from the Ombudsman now that they have received the UN Special Rapporteur's recommendations. Then we have also made complaints to Frontex on how they register children, and we're waiting for a response. That procedure is still ongoing. And then on other different topics, we work with very vulnerable populations, especially with people that have medical conditions. And we have, in the last couple of months, had positive results to interim measures in the European Court of Human Rights. So for people, so under Article 3, the prohibition on inhumane treatment or torture. So people that had disabilities or severe medical conditions that could not be treated in Lesbos, but they were still stuck in the camp for months without receiving treatment, living in tents. So we made presentations on their behalf, and many of them have been positive, and they have been moved to the mainland where they're receiving medical treatment. And I think this is a big success, but at the same time, it's a big failure, because although the European Court has given us the interim measures, Greece does not respect the obligations that come from the European Court. So it has been a big challenge to get Greece to follow the orders of the European courts. And I think this is the biggest disappointment, because you would think that when you have European institutions that are there to protect basic human rights, that countries would follow and they would feel ashamed and try to respect those decisions from the courts, but that has not been our experience. Our experience has been quite the contrary, following up on the Greek government, trying to get them to respond, to provide accommodation, medical care, but at the end being Fenix the one that is providing these services. So for example, someone that had to be given accommodation, we were paying for a hotel for many months until the government, a couple of months later, finally decided to respect the European Court's decision. And then, well, other examples of things that we're doing, we just presented a report to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants on what I was explaining before about Turkey being a safe country and people being left here in limbo without being able to access the right to asylum. So we just presented a big report to them. And then we have many private conversations with the European Commission on living conditions in the camps, on the suspension of cash assistance, on the suspension of food assistance to asylum seekers in the camp, on the problem of readmissions to Turkey, so Turkey not taking people back for 2 years and people not being able to present their asylum claims. So we have direct conversations with Johansson's office in which they ask for evidence of cases so they can also make presentations to the Greek government and ask for explanation on specific topics. And I think besides legal representation, and this is something that we have discussed with the team this year, besides legal representation on the one-on-one cases, I think now more than ever, advocacy is very important because there are many issues that don't relate to one specific case. They're a generalized problem. And therefore, it's very important that European institutions, human rights organizations, they have field evidence to be able to support their advocacy and their lobbying at the national and at the European level.
Wow, thank you, Amanda. That is really huge and important work, but also so challenging. I mean, I know I've had some experience also in France with unaccompanied minors, and the age assessment is, I think, one of the biggest issues in relation to unaccompanied minors. And when you talked also about the European Court of Human Rights and how Greece has not respected many decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, I think it also shows how difficult it is to actually achieve this objective that Fenix Aid has now, this idea of ultimately empowering asylum seekers and refugees, because legal aid, I mean, legal representation before courts, and it's also, and legal mobilization more generally is part of this broader project of empowering, right? And ultimately, if there are some, victories, but in the same time, the victory is also a disappointment because Greece, for instance, doesn't respect the decision, then it sort of shows how complicated, how intricate the whole situation is, and how difficult the work that you're carrying is. So on this note, I wanted to conclude and thank you very much again for accepting our invitation, and thank you for your insights. I think that our research team has gained a lot of insightful ideas from this engagement with you. We wish you sincerely good luck in your very important work, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for your very interesting questions, and I'm happy to hear that it was useful. And please do reach out and do spread the word about what you heard today. It's very needed that people don't run to the next crisis and forget that there's a lot of people still stuck here at the borders.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.